All right, welcome everybody. We're happy to have you with us wherever you are. It's daytime in the US, it's evening here in Beirut, and it's something else in other parts of the world. And other parts of the world is what we're talking about, because this is a panel discussion between three participants, people who are involved in a very powerful play that Robert Myers, professor at the American University of Beirut and award-winning playwright, has written about episodes in the life and work of the late foreign correspondent, the Arab American Anthony Shadid, who had a short but powerful career in the Middle East, reporting basically about the lives and sentiments and worldviews of ordinary people, alongside the powerful and the rich and the famous and the leaders and all the other people in the news. And Robert wrote this play that is going to be put on at Yale University in cooperation with the Council for Middle East Studies, who are hosting us. And it's going to be directed by Kirsten Sanderson, who is an accomplished director and producer and many other things in audiovisual, television, film. And I'm involved to put together a panel, which we're doing, of distinguished journalists who also worked with Anthony and knew him well. Many of them worked with him in Baghdad and Beirut and other places. And these journalists, which we'll talk about as we get into the discussion, we'll have a panel of journalists. The 29th and 30th of April are the evenings of the play, and the 30th of April in the afternoon is the panel discussion, which is open to the public. And with those welcoming words, I would welcome you all and turn it over to Robert so he can tell us a little bit more about this play, which is actually a workshop production, which he'll explain what that means. Thank you for being with us, and we hope you will join us when the play and the panel discussion actually happen.
Well, thank you, Rami. It's always wonderful to be with you, and it's great to be here with you and with Kirsten Sanderson, with whom I have worked for now well on 20 years. We first met working on a Broadway play about Richard Nixon and the Watergate tapes. We also did together a play about drone pilots in Los Angeles, a play that I wrote called Unmanned, and another play called Twilight Country about two women in Asheville, North Carolina in 1948, one an African-American woman, one a liberal white Southern writer, who meet during a moment of trauma just before the civil rights movement. So we've known each other for a very long time and had the pleasure of working together. And Rami and I have been working closely together in Beirut. I'm the director of the Center for American Studies and Research. It's the Print Al-Walid Center. And we're co-producing this workshop production of the play A Thousand Strange Places, Anthony Shadid and the Middle East. The title, as you'll come to see, speaks to the extraordinary career of Anthony Shadid, who grew up in Oklahoma City. Our cast is Lebanese and Lebanese American and Arab American, Summer Kanan, Islam Balba, Shafiq Bahu, Maria Bashara, who worked with me in Beirut, as did Summer on various productions, Sara Bitar, who's New York-based, and then we're working with Mamoun Tabu, who's a New York-based artist from Tripoli. So as Rami said, the play is on April 29th. That's a Friday at 8 p.m. at the MacMillan Center on Hill House, 34 Hill House. And then the following night, the 30th, it's at 7 p.m. As Rami alluded to, at 2 p.m. on April the 30th, which is a Saturday, he has organized a panel of distinguished journalists who knew and worked with Anthony Shadid in Iraq and elsewhere in the Middle East. And for those of you who've lost track of time, next year will be the 20th anniversary, if one can call it that, of the American invasion of Iraq. And obviously the echoes of that debacle we see daily with what is going on in Ukraine. And it's also the 10th anniversary of the death of Anthony Shadid too, this year. So it's a moment of reflection. The play, I hope, shows the various sides of Shadid, which is to say, he has a wry sense of humor. He's an extraordinary writer. I'm not the only one to compare his writing to some of the war writing of Stephen Crane or Ernest Hemingway and others. He's that rare person who made the journey back in terms of his roots to the Middle East and wrote a beautiful memoir. If you have not read it, I highly recommend it, called House of Stone, which is about rebuilding, literally, the family home in the south of Lebanon. So the play will be about 2 hours long. As Rami said, it's a workshop production. It will have certain number of production values. The actors will have the scripts there in front of them. But I think it will give you a window into a world that many people really don't have access to by, first of all the extraordinary performance of these actors and the experience they bring. And also Rami did not mention the fact that he was instrumental in speaking to Anthony's widow, Nada Bakri, about her contributing Anthony Shadid's papers to AUB, to the American University of Beirut. And that was one of the major bases for this play. It's not a verbatim play. It's not strictly a historical play. It's play, but it draws heavily on that material. And as Rami said about Kirsten, she's worked in a whole range of areas. Maybe she can mention some of them, but I'm really thrilled that she's working with me on this. She worked with Mike Farrell on a piece about climate change, in which she also uses audio visual material. Terre Haute, another play about Gore Vidal and Timothy McVeigh. And one of the great things, of course, about Shadid is he relocates terrorism to 1995 with Oklahoma City. Suddenly, we cannot think of him and terrorism or whatever without thinking about it as the prelude to January 6th. So the play, I don't want you to think it's a lecture, it's a play. And I think it will really engage you, and I hope so. And I hope you can come. But let me turn it over to Kirsten, and she can talk a little bit about her process on the play and perhaps her own experience and what she brings to it. Kirsten.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. As you may have gleaned from the list of projects Robert and I have done together, he and I both veer towards taking historically important, significant, relevant stories and bringing them to the stage. It doesn't mean literally translating history. Very frequently, we're transposing characters, taking something out of somebody else's mouth and putting it in this person's mouth for the sake of structuring it so that it works as drama, and to bring these stories to a wider audience. Pretty much everything I do in the theater has to do with contemporary life and politics. I've done a lengthy series of operas with my longtime collaborator, Michael John Lacusa, about the lives of the First Ladies. Robert and I, as we mentioned, did the project on Nixon. Terre Haute is another one of my strictly political and politically interested works. And for me, as an artist, I fascinated by the world we live in. I also work in television and work in television news. And so I deal directly with political figures and world leaders and hideous and horrifying disasters such as the one we're looking at in the Ukraine right now. And my way of making sense of the world is putting it on the stage and presenting it historically and breaking it down in terms of, and this is one of the things that drew me to Shadid and why I love his work, bringing something that's flat and on the page into reality, making you understand these people as people, and bringing characters to life. For people in the Western world who don't know anything about the Arab world or the East, Shadid's writing opened a window on that. He helped you see these people in their day-to-day lives and their personal dramas and trials, and relate to them in a way that makes war a less distant and less abstract experience, and hopefully calls on all of us to engage more positively in the world we live in. So that's me and my theater stuff.
That's great. Thank you. I'd love to have Rami talk about it, because he was the motivating force for this project and a range of projects about Shadid. Only things I'd like to add to what you're saying are two things that I hope that the play does are, number one, ironically, Anthony Shadid, who's from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, in his writing, one can almost make the case that he has a more profound love of Lebanon and the Middle East than do some of the people who have to fight the daily battles. It's such a struggle that you're worn down, from corrupt leadership to wars, to the list is endless. But he was able to extract what's so compelling and historically compelling about the region, and above all, it's the people. Sometimes you don't know whether to kiss them or kill them, but if you have spent time in the East, as I have 20 years, and lived with someone who's immersed in that culture, it's a vitality for life and stories. And I think he does, as Kirsten suggests, bring those to life. And that's something we're trying to do in the play. The other thing that I would say is that it's become clear, I think, through Ukraine, the hideous conflation of regions, that the war on terror et al., us, them mentality, how not only despicable, but how fallacious that worldview is. And I think Shadid, by the particularity, the Iraqis are quite different from the Lebanese. You don't have to tell anyone from Lebanon or Iraq this, they know. The Yemenis are very different from the Libyans, right? The Egyptians are very different from the Jordanians. We know this about Latin America. There are 18 Spanish-speaking countries. We don't think that Ecuador is the same as Argentina. And yet somehow, during the war on terror, there was this conflation of Arabs and people from that part of the world. And I would suggest that that's one of the things that we're dramatizing here, is the profound humanity of people in this part of the world, even in a period of great tumult and war and violence, but also this differentiation. People may have desires that overlap and things that unite them, but there are also profound cultural differences. And this is one of the shortcomings I have noticed about myself and other Americans, is this tendency to reduce people to a label. And it's not possible if you actually see the world through the lens of someone like Anthony Shadid. So with those observations, I'd love to turn this back to where it began with Rami Khouri, who introduced us and also introduced me to the work of Shadid. And it's been one of many collaborations we've done. So Rami, do you have a few thoughts here before we let everybody go?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Just to amplify one point, to put in full context, you had said I was instrumental in studying the archives. In fact, it was the person who did the work to bring the archives to AUB was Kaukab Shbaro, who was the chief archive, head of the archive section at AUB Libraries. And once the papers were deposited at AUB on loan for 10 years, when I heard that, I was away in the US at Harvard when Anthony died. And when I heard that later that his papers had been deposited at AUB, the next time I went to AUB, when I returned to Beirut, I immediately went to look at them. And I spent about an hour going through boxes of papers that were filed in manila folders, which he had in his office and home. And I immediately recognized within a couple of hours that this is an unprecedented insight into the craft and the values of probably the greatest American foreign correspondent of his generation, which is what he's been called by some of the top American journalists. So he's been recognized by his peers as being probably the leading foreign correspondent of his generation. So I immediately launched the project. We raised a bit of money. We hired a research assistant to file and go through all the material. And I read everything in the archives. I read all his books. I went back and got 350 of his articles and read them. And then I interviewed 50 of his colleagues and friends, but mostly his colleagues, editors, writers, journalists, who worked with him, who were in other newspapers, but lived and worked with him in different cities, people who worked for him, some of his assistants in Beirut and other places. And I didn't mean to interview 50. I thought I'd interview 10 or so, but it was so fascinating. And what kept me going was that every person I talked to told me stuff that was new. And in a way, interviewing people about Anthony was a kind of mirror of Anthony interviewing ordinary people around the Middle East. You'd think that after a couple of years that a taxi driver, a school teacher, a cafe waiter couldn't really tell you anything new. But the whole point of what Anthony did was that every single person mattered, no matter what you were, university professor, taxi driver, farmer, every single person mattered. And he was convinced that it was the collective thoughts and emotions of these people, ordinary people around the Middle East. Now there's about 450 million Arabs. When he was working, it was around 340 million, 360 million. Now we're 450. He thought that the collective sentiments of all these Arab men and women would shape the destiny of this region. And of course, the uprisings of 2010 to 11 was a major signal that he was correct. But the autocratic control mechanisms of political elites supported by foreign powers in the Middle East fought back against the uprisings, and therefore we haven't had a breakthrough to genuine democracy yet, but that is a long story that will be written over decades and decades, or maybe even centuries. But the key point, I think, about Anthony that came out of all my research, and thank you to Robert also for when he asked me about 3 years ago to head a small working group on the Shadid archives, with the idea that what can we do to take these piles of paper and bring them to the world, bring them to students. So Robert was very instrumental in doing that. And I did go to Neda Shadid, Anthony's wife and widow, and I wanted to tell her that we wanted to do this, and she was very supportive. She thought it was a great idea. And then I also talked to Anthony's former wife, Julia, and she was supportive. And and I talked to his family, his mother and his father and his uncles in Oklahoma and elsewhere. So I think what we're doing in a way is amplifying the fundamental issue that Anthony worked his life around, which is that ordinary people matter, and you need to listen to people. If there was one dynamic that Anthony mastered, it was listening. And his colleagues at the Washington Post, after he died, they put out a little memorial volume about him, and they called it The Listener. And he spent time listening to people, and he cared about what they said. And they trusted him, and they opened up. And then this incredible dynamic happened, which you'll see in the play when it happens, about when people open up, they share their inner sentiments, and because they trust you, and because they want somebody to care about them. Their governments don't care about them, their private sectors don't care about them, foreign armies don't care about them, colonizing settlers don't care about them, but they want somebody to care. And if it happened to be an Arab American foreign correspondent who clearly signaled through his words, through his work, and through his eyes, when Anthony was talking to people, as you'll see in the play, he was scribbling in his notebooks while his eyes never left the eyes of the people he was interviewing. I mean, these powerful human signals that you matter, whoever you are, you matter. And I want to know what you feel. He didn't ask people what they thought of Saddam Hussein or Hosni Mubarak. He wanted to ask them what did they think about themselves and their lives. And this is, I think, Anthony's genius, which I'll finish with this, is that his work, his articles, and this comes out in the play that Robert caught so well, he was able to relay the central dynamic or sentiment that he felt defined the lives of so many people, and in fact, the condition of the Middle East, and even his own life in many ways, which was the condition of uncertainty, of imprecision, of we don't know what's going to happen or what's going on around here. And this is something that is incredibly important for people in the Middle East, in the Arab world particularly, and is almost totally misunderstood around the world because it's not captured in the mainstream media. There are a lot of really good foreign correspondents, and you will meet some of them at the panel, some outstanding reporters and editors and writers, but Anthony was the only one who spent his entire career, I think it was around 12 or 13 years altogether, in the Middle East, doing this, getting the views of ordinary people out there. So these are the key points I wanted to make, and you will see and hear in the play, and with Kirsten's Kirsten's great technical prowess, you'll feel with the music and the lights and the this and the slides, you'll feel a lot of the sentiments that shape what was going on in the region. So those are the key points I would make, and then we can discuss other things as well.
Yeah, Kirsten, do you have some final thoughts before we sign off here?
You know, I was thinking about those notebook pages and how, Rami, the boxes that you saw, and I went to AUB as well and thought, oh, I'll look through the archive. Well, I arrived down there and the archive is epic. It's massive. I asked for one thing and a gigantic cart of boxes came out. It would take years, I think, to go through the whole thing. But you went through a lot of it. And one of the striking things that you found, which forms something in the play, is his style of writing these notes and how he saw what he saw and how he would select an image, a boy in green shorts, a hand on the ground, a truck with a loud horn, and abstractly note while he was in the moment, all of these things. And you can look at his notes and see the thinking behind the moment. And then you can move forward into the article that he wrote and see how his experience in the moment translates into what ends up on somebody's breakfast table in Washington and New York. And I found all of that really fascinating. And one of the things you'll see in the play is a very sincere effort to take all of this genuinely factual and archival stuff from the records and bring it to life in a way that we hope will reflect the way Anthony brought characters to life. And I also want to add for our audience, the beautiful house that he renovated and lived in and just finished before he passed away. It's the house he writes about in House of Stone, is also Robert's elegant background. So the home that you see behind him is Anthony's home in Marjayoun, and I can't let this seminar close without pointing that out to one and all.
Yeah. And if I could just add a little bit to that
please.
too. And the background that you see behind me, digital background, is the American University of Beirut, where I am actually right now for a couple of weeks teaching and doing work. Anthony was, when I was running the Islam Faris Institute at AUB, and Anthony had just come to Beirut to work for the Washington Post, to be based in Beirut. He opened an office. Immediately, I recognized, his talent. I had met Anthony when he first came to the Middle East, when he was in Cairo, I think with the AP maybe. And then we met in Jordan when I was there. And so I knew him throughout his career. So when he came to Beirut and I was at AUB, I said, hey, Anthony, come, we got a position. We want you to be our first writer in residence. I just made this up. And it was because I wanted him to be physically linked to us. And he loved AUB. He always used the library a lot to research, which he was a huge researcher of history and culture and stuff like that. So he would come like once a week and spend a day, and we gave him a little office, and he would use the library, and then he'd come and hang around and we'd chat, and then he would go back to the South to work on his house or to the Washington Post office. But what Kirsten was saying is the way he worked in reporting and research and how he transmitted what he saw and heard and felt and smelled and touched, he translated that into text. He put words together. And one of the fascinating things that came out of my interviews with 50 people was how many of his colleagues and other people, like his agent who passed away, his book agent, a brilliant man, told me they all said different things about, they made parallels between Anthony's writing and other art forms. So somebody said he was like a novelist. Somebody said he was like a painter. And somebody said, no, he was like a dramatist. He did little plays. Somebody said, no, he did documentaries. Or he was like a poet. Or he was like a short story writer. I mean, or a filmmaker. It was extraordinary. And each one of these analogies, I'd asked the person to explain, and they were absolutely right. And what Anthony did is he translated human reality into art forms that were easy for people to grasp. And that's why he was so popular with his editors and with his readers. And this was a unique style that nobody had ever really done before. And he was writing for daily newspapers. When the Iraq war erupted, he insisted on staying there. All the other foreign correspondents left. He stayed there and he convinced his editor, Phil Bennett, who is one of the panelists with us. We have him only on a taped interview because he couldn't do it in person this time. 2 years ago when we were supposed to do this, he would have been. But Phil was his editor, and he told Phil, I'm not leaving. And Phil said, okay, and he let him stay. And one of the things you'll hear about on the panel is the important relationship between correspondents and editors back home. So there's many dimensions to this, and you will see it all in the play, and I hope you'll be able to attend the panel of journalists who will shed new light on not just talking about Anthony, but talking about what is the relevance of Anthony's legacy today when you look at Yemen and Palestine and the Uyghurs and the Rohingya and all the other problems around the world and conflicts and wars and Ukraine and Russia. What is the relevance of this kind of reporting? And I think this is the great challenge to journalism, and we will discuss this and hopefully shed some useful light on it, while at the same time honoring the incredible legacy that Anthony left us.
Well, thank you. Let me remind people of the dates, and then maybe I'll make a closing comment pretty much based on what the two of you have said. I'd like to remind everybody the play will be at Yale's MacMillan Center, co-produced by the Center for Middle East, the Council on Middle East Studies at Yale and the Center for American Studies and Research at the American University of Beirut. The panel is co-produced by the Global Engagement Initiative of AUB in New York by Rami Khouri and the Pointer Fellowships at Yale. So we hope you can attend all of it. The play will be on April the 29th at 8 p.m. at the MacMillan Center at 34 Hill House. The following night, the 30th, which is Saturday, it'll be at 7 p.m. The panel will be at 2 p.m. On that same day in the same venue. And for those people who are in the New York area, it will be at Open Jar, which is at 1601 Broadway at 7 p.m. on May the 2nd, which is a Monday. The final thing I'd like to say, drawing on what Rami and Kirsten both said, is for those of you like me who knew that you're being lied to about the war in Iraq and what was going on in the Middle East, we hear this now. I'm not making an equivalency with Vladimir Putin and what's going on in Ukraine, but there's all this talk that the Russian people are being lied to, right? Well, it was done in a very different way in the United States. And if you paid attention, you probably could have had a better sense of what was going on. But for the people who are looking at especially the New York Times and the reporting of Judith Miller and others, there was a consensus about Iraq, and it turned out that it was wrong in every respect. Had people paid attention instead of to these political pronouncements and handouts from the Pentagon in the New York Times and elsewhere, and there are a number of editors, et cetera, who supported it. You know, David Remnick at the New Yorker, we can go on. It's like it's forgotten. People simply accepted it. In the Washington Post, there were these simpler stories, right? And when Anthony Shadid would sit down and have dinner with a Shia family, and they were not supportive of the invasion, when you see the kind of ambiguity in response about the American invasion, you knew that had you paid attention, that it was a debacle unfolding. It was a disaster unfolding, right? And that's, I think, what we're trying to capture here is a counter narrative. If you want to see a counter narrative to that official narrative, A Thousand Strange Places, which is taken from Ibn Battuta, right? The famous sort of Marco Polo of the Arab world, is that one thing that we do in the play is use Arabic and English. My wonderful collaborator, Nada Saab, translated scenes into Arabic. We have speakers from the Arabic speakers from the Arab world and from the United States. Scenes are in English and in Arabic, and the worldview, the texture of the story, you get in a very different way. And Anthony Shadid, by being bilingual, by being able to tell the story, sometimes it's uproariously funny. I think it's really funny. So I don't want you to think this is some pedagogical exercise. It's a play. I think you'll enjoy it, and I hope you can come. But I also think it's a window into a world, as Kirsten said, that very few people know. But if you'd like to know more about it, the prehistory of the present, how did we get to where we are now? I think this is a really good place to start, and I hope you'll all be able to come to see the play at Yale, the panel at Yale, or if not, come see it in New York. So thank you, Rami, and thank you, Kirsten. It's great talking to you about this really exciting work, and thanks to the Council for Middle East Studies at Yale and CASAR at AUB. Thanks for your support. This is an important project. It's great to be part of it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, everybody.
You bet. We'll see you
Bye.
later.
Thanks. Look forward to seeing everybody at the play and the panel.
You bet.